Welcome back. President Trump rolling out his 2026 affordability agenda aimed at driving costs down for American households. The president targeting lower rates, focusing on mortgage rates and credit card rates. He's calling for a one-year 10% cap on credit card interest rates beginning January 20th. He's also ordering Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to buy $200 billion in mortgage bonds to push mortgage rates lower. The president signaling support for the American homebuyer with a new order restricting large investors from buying single-family homes. Joining me now is White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. Kevin, great to have you this morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Maria.
Well, this is a whole bunch of efforts on the part of the president and your team to try to lower costs. Let's go through some of them. The ban on large institutional investors purchasing single-family homes. How much of an impact has that had on the supply of homes, Kevin?
Right. Well, nationwide, it depends on what you think a large institutional investor is. That there are some definitions that it's people who own more than 100 homes, some definitions that it's people who own more than 1,000 homes. But if you go to the 100-home definition, then you're looking at, in some places, up to 20% of the market is owned by institutions. Now, the institutions have a tax advantage over ordinary home buyers in the sense that they get to write off the depreciation on the home as they're holding it and renting it. And so it basically makes like the tax rules put people out of the running when they want to compete with an institutional investor. And it's something that President Trump just doesn't think is right. And I think that what we're likely to see is an executive order that describes what an institutional investor is, what a single family home is. And then when that comes out, there'll be a clear guidance to people about when they can feel free that they're, playing on a level playing field when they're competing for a home.
Kevin, this 10% cap on credit card interest rates obviously has the banks talking, and a lot of them are very worried about this. This new potential card cap could wipe out the earnings from the card portfolios for a year. Those are the expectations there. If applied to all cards, analysts say it would hurt large bank pre-tax earnings by between 5 and 18%. And wipe out earnings for the monolines like a Cap One Financial. Your thoughts on the president putting this in place? Obviously, Congress would have to codify this for law. Will these banks be forced to follow this?
Well, I think, we've been in conversations with the big banks, with CEOs of many of the big banks, who think that the president's onto something, that he's got a great idea that they could potentially voluntarily provide for people who are in that sort of sweet spot of not having financial leverage very much because they don't have access to credit, but they have enough income and stability in their lives so that they're worthy of credit. And so our expectation is that it won't necessarily require legislation because there'll be really great new trump cards presented for folks that are voluntarily provided by the banks.
And then there's a significant move on mortgage-backed securities with the president calling for $200 billion in purchases. Not technically quantitative easing, but the GSEs are the buyers and not the central bank. Talk to us about this. How significant a move would you expect in mortgage rates as a result of this move from the president?
Well, this is a move that was very much supported by Secretary Bessent and Bill Pulte, who runs Fannie and Freddie. And the basic idea is that if you get the spread down on the interest rate for mortgages, then you help people get cheaper mortgages. And we've seen a pretty big reaction to the announcement, and I think that actually makes us all feel better, because the truth is that fewer people are buying homes right now than we've seen pretty much in my lifetime. And the reason is that we had runaway Biden inflation, and then the Fed lifted interest rates so much that mortgage rates went through the roof, and the typical monthly payment about doubled for an ordinary family buying an ordinary home, and the down payment they needed to buy a home went from about $15,000 to about $32,000. And so there's a real lot of room to make up, and we've got a whole bunch of policies that are going to help people do that. The one you didn't mention that we're also talking about, and the president will put the final plan out in Davos next week. I'll be flying up there with him, is that we're going to allow people to take money out of their 401ks and use that for down payment.
Well, that's interesting, to take money out of your 401k. Do you worry that taking money out of the 401k is going to hurt people on the other side for retirement?
Well, what you have to do is come up with a way. So a simple way. We're still talking about the mechanics of it, but suppose that you put 10% down on a home, and then you take 10% of the equity of the home and put it in as an asset in your 401k. Then your 401k will grow over time as the value of your house grows. You'll be healthy, have more money for retirement, and you'll have solved the liquidity constraint problem and gotten yourself a house early in life.
Wow, that's an interesting move. We'll be waiting for the president to give us more details next week. Kevin, there's a lot of things that the president has announced as a result of this affordability push, and I want to get your take on the impact. What kind of economic growth would you expect in the first half of the year? We've been talking a lot about the idea of 5% GDP. Where are you at?
Yeah, I think that right now, if we look at productivity, it's running at about 4%. And then usually capital and labor add another couple of percent to growth in a typical year. So if we really keep that 4% productivity, we're looking at one of the best years we've ever seen. And so I have a hard time seeing growth below 4%. And I think we could see some blowout year growth numbers, the annual growth numbers that are things that we haven't seen before. Because look at it this way. In the fourth quarter, we have GDP now saying that it's about 5%, a little bit more. But that's with a 1.5% penalty from the government shutdown. So if there hadn't been a shutdown, then GDP now would be telling us about 6.5%. I mean, those are numbers, Maria, that you and I have rarely seen in our lifetimes.
Wow. The analyst community on Wall Street is also talking about a windfall over taxes once we get through April 15th. Households will likely spend at least 70% of their nearly $200 billion 2026 tax windfall, according to Jake Ubina over at Piper Sandler. What kind of a tax windfall would you expect this tax season?
Right, I think that number is about right. Yeah, I think that's about the right number. I mean, the fact is that the no tax on tips, the no tax on overtime, all of that happened mid-year, and so the IRS didn't really have time to change the tax forms. And so the folks that are in that spot, and also the reduced tax on seniors, that they're going to see it in their refunds. And so our expectation is that you're going to have the biggest refund season ever, which is going to be a significant positive stimulus for the economy. But I will add a non-inflationary stimulus, because we've got all the supply going up too. We've got $18 trillion in new factory construction and so on. And so I think that it's really, the Trump golden age is going to be tested, the theory of it this year, and I think it's looking pretty good.
That is great. Meanwhile, there's a lot of pushback on this investigation into Jay Powell. A lot of debate over Fed independence following the Justice Department's probe of the chairman over his congressional testimony last June. Global central bankers have stepped in to defend Powell. They're warning that central bank independence is a cornerstone of economic stability. President Trump said this week he has no plans to fire Powell. He only wants lower interest rates. But, I mean, Kevin, did Jay Powell do anything wrong to justify an actual criminal investigation while the president wants lower interest rates?
Maria, we at the White House, we respect the independence of the Fed. You know how much you and I have talked about it. It's absolutely essential for the stability of the economy, and we respect the independence of the Justice Department. The problem is, from the point of view of the circumstance, that the Justice Department was asking the Fed to answer some questions, and they couldn't get their answers. Janine Pirro said that she was asking questions all the way back a few months ago, and so they felt the necessity of doing it this way. I find that regrettable. I certainly hope that there's nothing to see here. But, all corners of government, the Fed, the White House, everything, we have a responsibility to the American people to be transparent. And I think that, if I were Fed chair, that I would insist on transparency. I probably would have answered the questions right away. But the bottom line is, I expect, Jay's a good man. I expect that there's nothing to see here, that the cost overruns are related to things like asbestos, as he says. But I sure wish they had been more transparent.
Well, I mean, the issue is now that the Democrats are so angry over this investigation that they're going to stop progress on the president's nominees. I mean, the president's trying to, move forward toward naming his next chairman of the Federal Reserve. You're on the short list. It could come this month. A prediction market showing this tight race on Kalshi. You and Kevin Warsh are the leaders of the pack here. And, of course, we know that the president gave a second interview to Rick Reeder at BlackRock. So we're all trying to understand, where that process is. But look, at the end of the day, the person has to be confirmed, right? I mean, the Democrats are saying we're not going to move anybody forward, any of the governors, the Federal Reserve. So is this investigation going to hurt the president's agenda and stop its progress?
No, not at all. I mean, the fact is that it's a simple request for information. I'm sure the information will be forthcoming shortly, and then things will move forward. And the people you mentioned, Kevin Warsh, Rick Reeder, they're terrific guys. They'd all be great Fed chairs. The president doesn't have a tough choice, I keep saying, about who the Fed chair is. He has nothing but good choices. And if it were to be me, I've said that I would take the job, and I would take that job with a commitment to Federal Reserve independence and transparency. And I think that that's something that the Fed could have done a lot better in the past.
Has the president spoken to you about what's next for you?
Yeah, we'll leave those conversations between me and the president.
Kevin, we're waiting on this sweeping tariff decision from the Supreme Court, this landmark test in the Supreme Court. The justices signaling a decision on presidential tariff authority in an emergency could come as soon as next week. We've been waiting. The second opinion day came and went, and we didn't get the decision. What are the alternatives should the president see a negative ruling from the Supreme Court and put hundreds of billions of dollars in tariff revenue at risk?
Right. Well, we're highly confident that they're going to side with us, that the legal analysis is on our side. And, we've talked about that on your show before, so I won't have to go into the details of that. But we also have a backup plan that's really solid. We can put a 10% tariff on right away to make up most of the room, and then use things like the 301 authorities, the 232 authorities to backfill the things that we've already achieved with these great deals with the countries. I expect that the Supreme Court is going to be really, really supportive of the president's plan, because look at all of the things that we've created this year. We've got a huge reduction in the deficit. We've got really, really high economic growth, and inflation is way down. If you look at the consumer price index, the last data that we saw showed the core over 3 months at an annual rate at only 1.6%. And so the idea that the tariffs would harm the economy and create inflation has been proven wrong by the data. And I think that the Supreme Court wouldn't want to upend all of that great success either.
Well, the president has used tariffs so effectively, and in terms of ending wars, by the way. But Kevin, you just said immediately we could put a 10% tariff in place. What does that mean? So that wouldn't be under the quote-unquote emergency then?
Yeah, there's a special authority in circumstances like this where there's a 10% tariff that could last for 6 months, which would give you time to sort of iron things out.
And Kevin, do you want to see Congress go for another reconciliation package? It seems the conversation is gaining strength within the Congress, and I know the president has lots of items to perhaps include in a second reconciliation package by year end.
Right. The president is discussing with congressional leaders whether we should do that. I think a lot of us, if you look at like the great ideas to help Americans with their housing issues, believe that a second reconciliation could help us with that. But in the end, I think the majority leader and the speaker are going to have to count the votes and decide whether they can pull it off. But if they can, we'll celebrate here in the White House. All
right, Kevin, great to see you this morning, and we will see you in Davos next week.
Yes,
Thank you so much. All right, Kevin Hassett at the White House. We'll be right back. Stay with us.